Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Costa Rica Crypto. And today I am speaking to Isaac, and it's kind of a little bit of a different piece for me because in a sense I feel like it's counterculture meets blockchain meets legitimacy. And it's a really interesting use of EOS and blockchain technology. And it's not kind of your typical run of the grain, but it's fascinating to me. So I hope that you guys enjoy this. I'm sitting down with Isaac today, and I think it's going to be a really exciting chat. I guess we'll start at the beginning, Isaac. Kind of, who are you? What's your background? How did you find the EOS space? And how did you kind of become aware of blockchain?
Yeah, no, thanks, Matt. So as my personal background, I'm an RF and microwave electrical engineer. And I went on and did a PhD at university. It was one of those things where after finishing my bachelor, got out there, saw some of the jobs that you could go into, and, inevitably there's, a training period or, there aren't those really exciting things. So I always liked taking on big challenges. So one of my professors back then invited me to come back and ended up doing a PhD where I developed chipless RFID. Actually managed to produce a couple of patents, but it was actually a little bit of a commercial lesson because both of my patents got bought to be buried, which is quite demotivating, particularly since the whole reason I went into engineering is I wanted to create things that people would actually use. Although one of the things that was kind of nice, publish a number of articles and things like that, and I am able to claim that I've got the highest cited article on IEEE, which is the International Institute of Electrical Engineers, regarding chipless RFID with over 200 citations. So that's sort of a little bit about my background. Then I went down an entrepreneurial route because of that experience at the university. And ended up creating a startup business where I used different types of what we call proximity engagement technology and built around it a whole data and analytics platform that would deliver targeted marketing content to end users and then appropriately collect, data and analytics for businesses to be able to use. And that was a really good education, I think, in what businesses want and then trying to balance that with protecting consumers, giving them what they want and not impinging on their privacy, safety or security. But then around 18 months ago, I had a couple of things happen. Firstly, I think like many people, I had a friend that was really into Bitcoin, doing pretty well and, kept kind of encouraging me, come on, man, you got to get in. But I looked at this thing and there was something behind it that I wasn't so comfortable with. So I thought to myself, well, rather than just diving in blindly and hoping for the best, why don't I take a deep dive into, well, what actually makes Bitcoin safe, secure, all of the rest of it? So that was my introduction to blockchain technology. And to be honest, I fell in love with it. It's something that, I'm sure you and many of the listeners genuinely believe it's going to change the world. It's going to remove all of this redundancy and make possible use cases that previously we just didn't have the tools to make happen. And that's pretty exciting. Then in regards to EOS, so I had one of my members of the team here who, our chief blockchain officer. He is quite the fan of EOS, and he said, look, why don't we consider this thing? Because up until that point, I was really struggling with which blockchain to deploy on. I mean, I'd always talked about the technology that we're going to put forth is going to be blockchain agnostic because it's not for me. I wasn't going to build my own. I was going to use the excellent tools that are available. But when I had a look at what was available, essentially an enterprise level application just wasn't possible.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit of a dead end. I mean, listen, Ethereum's great. All all power to it, set the stage. But unfortunately, it's I actually want to do this,
Yeah.
I want to do this at a global level. So that put that out of the cards. And then the timing of it also worked out really well. EOS is a developing technology, and I guess that's how I started into it, and we've just gone from there.
So today we're here actually to speak about Parsl, Parsl, right? And as I kind of alluded to in the pre-talk, like Parsl is not your typical everyday use case, but we're going to talk about it and we're going to kind of dig into it. We're going to peel back the layers because when you really start to line everything up, it makes a lot of sense. I guess in the simplest form, and I should have referred to you as doctor rather, because you are indeed a doctor, clearly an intelligent man. So I'm going to give you that respect. I'm going to call you Dr. Isaac. Doctor, let's talk about Parsl. Like what is Parsl in the simplest form, and what is the problem that it's solving?
So Parsl is just a supply chain technology platform. That's what it is. It has a few fundamental pillars, one of which is smart packaging. We think that's the place where it makes the most sense. And I think many people these days are now accustomed to devices that used to not be smart, becoming smart and aware and able to do extra things. So there isn't anything in the cannabis ecosystem that you can acquire without any packaging. So it really is a place that makes sense. But one of the really core pieces there is at Parsl, we want to change the way that people think about supply chains. And that evolution is only possible through blockchain technology. So if we talk about tracking a product end to end, in any ecosystem, people can already visualize pretty clearly what that data is going to look like, somewhat how it's going to be collected when we talk about putting chip technology in smart packaging. And that's fine and dandy. And I think there's a number of other supply chain applications that have, taken product provenance and chain of custody information, put it on a blockchain. Great. Okay. But I don't think we should stop there. We haven't gone far enough. What we're trying to say, in the same way that our good friend Einstein explained that matter and energy are just two different aspects of exactly the same thing, what we're saying here at Parsl is that the movement of a product and the movement of the associated financial activity are also just two different aspects of the same thing. So I explained a product life cycle. Well, we do exactly the same thing with digital tokens that have the beginning of their life, are transferred through the ecosystem until at some point someone wants to transfer it back to some other form of currency, and those tokens are destroyed. Well, we've now created a life cycle of the associated financial activity within an ecosystem. Now, when we looked at putting this whole thing together, Parsl is a supply chain technology. We could have done it in any industry. And I mean, with my background in RFID, one of the ones that we looked at was the pharmaceutical market, which, it's a $10 billion global market. It makes a lot of sense. But within all of that, the cannabis industry was emerging. And it was one of those things where the way that we're putting this technology together is solving quite a number of pain points simultaneously in a way that will allow the cannabis industry to become what we call the preeminent supply chain in the world and serve as a model for how things could be.
Here's where things get interesting to me, because I think that the way that we look at cannabis is starting to change, right? We're seeing a lot of, particularly in my end of the world, in the US and in Canada, they're realizing that the effects of criminalization of cannabis are ultimately counterintuitive for a lot of different reasons. And that ultimately the legalization of cannabis it's coming with a major reform, right? We're seeing a lot of, cannabis and legal cannabis and some interesting statistics behind that, which include some positive financial repercussions, medical repercussions. and a lot of other things, but just kind of focusing for one moment on the medical standpoint, because I know that the supply chain is strictly on legalized cannabis. What do you think that the world has to gain from the legitimization, the legalization of cannabis from a medical perspective?
So, I think at this point, maybe I'll just start by relating a story for how I first became aware of the tremendous advances in cannabis-related medicinal science. So also about 18 months ago, I went to a meetup at a place here in Melbourne called the Peter Mac Cancer Centre. And listen, I'm an engineer. I tend to doubt most things that people claim unless there's solid evidence behind it. And I think, one of the issues that cannabis had is it can actually do so many things that if you just hear it without any evidence to back it up, it sounds too good to be true. And I think we've all grown up with that moniker that things that are too good to be true generally are. So I went to this meetup to actually have a look, and it was there for the first time that I was able to actually see that there's real science and data to actually underpin how and why cannabis is effective as a medicine. And, I think like many people in the cannabis industry, I had an experience there where, I saw a young kid, he was 17 years old, he was growing up to be a triathlete, and then he got struck down by a very rare condition. And, all of the medicines that the doctors were giving him were not really being so effective, and in some ways were actually hastening his demise. Until just by luck, both of his parents were nurses, and they happened to know someone who knew someone who said, hey, why don't you give medicinal cannabis a shot? And they did. And incredibly, in the next 18 months, so up until that point, he'd been experiencing tremendous pain that he described as 14 out of 10. He'd been having incredible amounts of seizures, even up to something like 200 a day, which when you calculate, how often you're awake, it's like every 15 minutes. So, I mean, what kind of a life is that? He wasn't wheelchair bound, he was bound to his bed. But once he started to use the cannabis, the pain level didn't go above a 7, and for 18 months, not one seizure.
Incredible.
Now, they may not have been able to prove exactly why that was happening at that point, but how could you deny this person that medicine? I mean, it's monstrous to do so. But similarly, at the same time, when I looked at the way that, in Australia, the government was going about introducing medicinal cannabis, yeah, sure, they legalized it, but then they regulated it to the point that no one could get it. It's kind of like, what was the point?
Yeah.
And it was really then that we came to think, well, I don't think regulators are bad or malicious or evil people. I just think that, there's a lot of fear and stigma that exists around cannabis where they want to introduce it, but they don't want to promote criminality or things like that. And for better or worse, and we can talk about that maybe another time, for the last 50 to 70 years, cannabis was predominantly dominated by criminals. So similarly, actually, to when you think about blockchain and its beginnings.
Exactly. So, exactly what I was about to say. It's what you just described is the regulation of blockchain as well. So it's just, they're so married. Sorry, continue. But I thought that was a really cool point.
No, look for sure. And listen, in some ways we can smash away so much of the BS that's around both cannabis and blockchain by showing, first of all, listen, the data's there for cannabis. It's just very poorly presented. Similarly, for blockchain, the data is there, but there's so much FUD that people are scared because, look, blockchain is not simple, not simple at all. And it's for particularly, when you look at the older generations, I mean, they're excited by it, but they're very scared. And I mean, one of the philosophies that we kind of carried with both in regards to blockchain and cannabis, we will only have won when we've convinced the grandmothers.
Yes.
To come on board with this.
Yeah, that's such a great mantra. I share your thoughts on just about everything you said so far. Cannabis has been shown to have some incredible medical benefits, and as you said, like it's funny because I almost got emotional just kind of listening to the story, and it's not as though that's new. Big Pharma has dominated a lot of things for a lot of time, man, and held a lot of power. And the demonization of cannabis has led to a lot of people taking a lot of drugs and being in a lot of pain unnecessarily. So it was touching, I guess. Let's get back to kind of the packaging part of Parsl. How is using authentic packaging going to provide some legitimacy rather to the legal cannabis market? How does Parsl kind of use smart codes and smartphones for verifications of these particular packages?
So at a very basic level, we're using chip technology to be able to provide functions like anti-counterfeit. So, and because the answer to that question, there's a number of different facets. So the first thing that we have to do is we need to be able to transparently prove to people that the cannabis that's in this legal supply chain has been legally grown and stayed in compliance all the way from when it was a seed until it reached that end patient. And we're able to provide that, first of all, using some of the techniques that we can bring to bear using my background, my engineering background with chip technology. And by the way, actually, one of the other things that I'll put out there, so the main technology we're using on the smart packaging is called NFC. Stands for Near Field Communication, and that's the technology that is in your phone to power things like Apple Pay and Android Pay, or it's in your tap and go credit card, and those short range proximity wireless technologies are starting to become very widely spread. And it's one of the things that, look, blockchain and cannabis are obviously exciting things to talk about, but it's only very recently that Apple, first of all, introduced NFC hardware into their mobile devices. But above and beyond that, it then took them additional time to actually open up access to the NFC controller in the device to third-party developers to be able to access. Since they've done that, though, each year when they upgrade the iOS platform, they generally open up more and more functionality to be able to enable higher level applications regarding the chip technology. Because, just as an example, so first they didn't let you have access to the chip at all. So what are you going to do there? Then they said, okay, you can have access to the chip, but it's only through the Apple OS, and there's only limited information that you can get there. Now, there's all sorts of cool security features that exist on that chip technology where if Apple were to fully open in the way that Android does, we would be able to take advantage of all of those simultaneously. So, for example, we have a secure internal supply chain in how we get those chips from the chip manufacturer, which is a company called NXP, all the way to the packaging manufacturer who puts it on the packaging and then supplies it to the businesses to package the cannabis. So the people that make that chip, in the foundry and things like that, they have this thing called an ECC originality signature, which is read-only once the chip's actually been created. And that would be a wonderful security feature to be able to use, but it's still something that we can only use some of the time, which is unfortunate. I mean, there are all sorts of other things that we're able to do there, but unfortunately, for security purposes, it's not a great idea to tell everybody all the little tricks that we've got in there, but what I can say is that we have got quite a number of them just from a chip perspective. Then you can layer into that the use of blockchain for an additional level of verification, because it's one thing for someone to be able to say hack a chip, but because we're using blockchain, they'd actually have to forge an entire life cycle and hack the chain itself, which, as you're familiar, is not a simple thing to do. One of my mantras that I say is that we're building so much security into this thing that if someone was able to hack this, they would just build a better system than us. And make the money legally, it wouldn't make sense to hack our system from an economics perspective. And we try to use, some of those principles of economics to encourage and drive the industry forward and bring an element of standardization, first of all, because we are all about the global supply chain of cannabis, but also just a lot of common sense to allow that industry to be able to grow and thrive.
So, Doctor, if I were to break this down, what I'm understanding is problem. Cannabis is becoming legalized for medical and recreational purposes in a lot of part of the world. Problem, verifying that the stuff is made properly by people who know what they're doing without chemical additives is relatively difficult. Solution, Parsl uses blockchain and tracking technology to ensure that it comes from the people who have grown it under the right process, with the right tools, who know what they're doing, and allows to track the shipment every step of the way so that you know the product that you're receiving is legitimate. Is that essentially kind of a short version of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, partly. But what I'd layer into it is, look, what I'd say is Parsl is not going to stop anybody cheating.
Of course.
But we're going to catch everybody who does. And that's the whole thing. So, there might be a grower doing the wrong thing who's trying to do things like that. But so how are we going to deal with that? So as you're possibly aware, every bit of cannabis in the legal supply chain has to have been tested in a licensed laboratory to move around in the supply chain. And that's great. But that information needs to be widely accessible and available so that people can check. So firstly, what we're doing is we put those lab test results on the blockchain to be able to make them immutable, enable that downstream verification, even to the level where eventually we are intending to provide home testing kits so that anyone in any place is going to be able to verify the data that we store. But then above and beyond that, we're looking at it and saying, okay, from a data-driven approach, because we spoke about cannabis as a medicine.
Yes.
And one of the problems that exists in the industry is how to define a strain. Because it's all well and good that we use names like OG Kush and Girl Scout cookies and all of the fancy and hilarious names that exist in the cannabis industry, which, is a very fun industry to be working in. But the problem is, if you buy OG Kush in California or you buy OG Kush in New York State, well, they're very unlikely to actually be the same thing.
Of course.
So then we come to the problem of, well, how are we actually going to define a strain? So then we took a step back and we thought about it and, okay, let's look at the science and let that drive the decisions that we're going to make. And similarly, try to bring an element of standardization so that science is repeatable and measurable in all places at all times. So the science of cannabis is actually quite clear that there are over 400 substances within the cannabis plant that determine its effectiveness as a medicine for a particular condition for a particular user. But then let's have a look at the lab testing regulations. They ask for the display and the testing of maybe 2 things, sometimes 6 things. I think in very rare cases up to 20. But I mean, I'm an engineer and I'm looking at this, and how is a researcher going to be able to do any valid research when they're looking at such a small part of the picture? So, okay, we're putting those lab test results on chain, but we're doing it in a way where we're reserving space for all 400 substances, plus at least 120 more because, well, the science is still developing. So what we then do is we use those the relative levels of those different substances to actually classify the strain. And that way, a patient is able to have a much better chance of being able to source what they've determined through practical use is the most effective strain for them and their condition in multiple places, which we think is incredibly important. Similarly, we also try to take it a step further, and this is, one of the key reasons that we are very much in favor of a global supply chain of cannabis and why we're trying to bring global standardization there. So we've spoken about strain matching, matching a particular strain to a particular condition to a particular person. Cool.
Yep.
So let's go the other way. I'm a person and I have a condition. Which strain should I get? Now, I've personally tested the experience in the United States of going to a cannabis doctor to get a recommendation. And let's just say that that's not a data-driven approach, nor is it particularly useful as an end user in determining what the most effective cannabis strain is to source. Now, we're going to try and help that because one of the things that our system does is we've got very granular data on the plant itself and all the product. We've also got very granular data on the people and their conditions. So at a base level, we're going to be collecting mass amounts of, open clinical trials of data for researchers to be able to use, which will then be available for doctors so that they can have some tool to be able to actually give a sensible recommendation to their patient. Again, great, but let's go to the next level. You can't grow every strain in every place in every way. So for patients to actually have access to the most effective and appropriate medicine, you must have a global supply chain of cannabis. And that's from a patient perspective. Now let's flip it the other way and look at the businesses. If you're a grower and you take extreme care, you grow it organically, there are no pesticides, you've got so few plants in the way that you're growing it that it's just the ultimate conditions for growing cannabis, and that cannabis is particularly effective as a medicine, well, you should have an economic benefit from doing so.
Yeah.
So firstly, we're going to enable, by creating the ability to be able to source that internationally, obviously within legal channels, we're going to provide that part of it, but we also incentivize the different businesses within the platform, and we actually promote the ones that are doing a better job. Because, again, our philosophy is everybody in this supply chain has to get a real and direct benefit through the use of this system, or else why are they going to do it? And that goes all the way from end users to businesses to ancillary businesses, even laboratories. As I said, we're trying to use the principles of economics to be like, the ones that are doing better tests will be promoted within our system. They'll get more customers because they're producing better data and producing value for the whole ecosystem. Similarly, we think that by doing all of these things this way, we should make it a lot easier for the regulators to be able to open this thing up and derive the tremendous economic benefits that are there and are available, while having a system that they can trust, because again, any bit of cannabis that comes into our ecosystem, we're able to track it all of the way to the end, not from seed to sale, from creation until consumption or destruction, because you'll have wastage and things like that. But again, we'll leave those details for another point. So we're ensuring, how many if people who follow cannabis news, there are tremendous amounts of articles about illegal cross-border trade that still exists because cannabis growers grow too much cannabis. They're not able to sell it in legal channels, and they have a history of being able to move it in non-legal channels, and they continue to do so. So we want to incentivize them. Don't sell it in those black market channels. You'll make more money if you do it the right way, and then your business will grow, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Brilliant. That gives me a lot more of a deeper perspective on what you guys are doing and why that it's needed. That's actually quite enlightening. I like it a lot. I know another thing that you guys have built into the system is a form of identification cards, like a medical identification card built into smartphone. How does that work? Do you want to chat about that really quickly?
Sure. And thanks for bringing that part up, because that's one of the parts of the system that I actually like best. So firstly, one of the problems that we've got, let's say we want to introduce a system and we want that system to be mandated for use for tracking and supply of cannabis. Now, if we're going to do that, we have to make sure that what we've done is extremely accessible, because if we're cutting people out of the system, well, there's just no way that it can be accepted and used. So, okay, one of the things that you need is to be able to ID person, but what happens to people who don't have a mobile device or don't have an address? We can't exclude them. That's not fair, it's not right, it's not ethical. So we've designed the system to utilize these smart cards. Now, the easiest way to kind of analogize that smart card is just to think of your credit card that right now already has a chip inside it that you use to tap and things like that. So when people sign on to the system, they're given a smart card that is then binded to them for the history of that card. It can never be transferred to another person. They can then use that card, firstly, to identify themselves in the context of the cannabis industry, but that card is then also effectively like a cannabis-specific credit card that they can use to go into a dispensary or whatever it is, identify themselves, and then also use it for purchases. Similarly, they can use it to unlock their device so that they don't need to put in cumbersome usernames and passwords if they don't need to. And then by so doing, it actually increases the security of the system. So one of the things that we're very proud of is that homeless people will have no problem using Parsl to access their medicinal cannabis, and will actually have a pathway if people want to sponsor their medication to ensure that it's done in a way that they actually then need to use the funds that are transferred for a specific purpose for the purpose that it was designed. And then above and beyond that, there's real data that is potentially going to be able to show how people were lifted up out of poverty because their conditions were treated with the tremendous healing powers of medicinal cannabis.
Yeah, I just want to interject for a quick second, and I think that it's important. Anybody who's sitting there who may be thinking, what does a homeless guy need to smoke weed for? I think that they should be ashamed of themselves, because in the context of a lot of mental illness, which strikes some of these people, and a lot of pain and a lot of suffering that they endure, the benefits of medicinal marijuana are such that it can greatly enhance their comfort, whether that's with themselves or whether it's on a pain level. So I think that creating accessibility for these people, and ultimately I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, in the sense that if you can provide somebody with, whether it's pain relief or relief from whatever it might be, maybe it's PTSD or whatever the ailment is, I'm sure there's a number of things that medicinal marijuana can be prescribed for. I think that it's important that they do have access, and the fact that you've created a way for them to retain that access and for other people to sponsor them is actually, I think it's cool. I think it's really impressive. So
now, and the other thing that I wanted to just throw in there about the smart cards that I think is an important point is one of the other actors in the supply chain that often gets ignored is unfortunately law enforcement. Yeah. And I think that, and by the way, also on that previous point about the homeless people, anyone who thinks that why do they need to smoke weed, they're asking the wrong question, because we need to get away from this, what I call sometimes a stoner stigma around cannabis. We're not dealing with something to get people high. We're dealing with a medicine to help them get better. So let's talk about law enforcement. Similarly to everyone else in the supply chain, the majority of the time they just want to do the right thing, but they don't have the tools to be able to effectively do so. So one of the problems is, how do you visibly, transparently distinguish between legal and illegal cannabis? So we provided a method. Law enforcement have a specific application that they can use, whether it's on a secure mobile device or on some of the other means that they have, where they can encounter a person that perhaps they suspect of criminal activity and say, well, hold on a minute, let me scan do you have a Parsl card? Let me scan it. Now they can identify them in the context of the cannabis industry, because that's obviously going to change the expectations of how much cannabis that person is allowed to have. For example, if you're a transporter or if you're an end user or if you're a dispensary owner, different rules apply, and so they should. So those smart cards are able to identify that person in context of the industry. It can also work via mobile, but so we have layers of redundancy in there, but the smart card's kind of the simplest way. But we take it a step further. Law enforcement have the ability to actually directly interrogate our blockchain in real time and de-encrypt the data so that they can see, only when they're in the proximity of a person, each and every bit of cannabis that should be in their possession. So now they've got a way to, well, hold on a minute, you're a licensed transporter. Okay, you've got, 500 pounds of cannabis in the back of the truck. But if you're supposed to have 600 pounds of cannabis in the back of the truck, law enforcement need a way to determine that because something is up.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is, okay, let's say we're talking about that 500, 600 pound situation. Well, how are they going to be able to know that? Because visibly it may not be so clear. So using the device that we've given them, they are then able to actually scan the packaging and check it off a list until they can go through and either determine, well, you shouldn't have this bit of cannabis or you shouldn't have that, or hold on a minute, there's 200 pounds missing, what's going on? So we're giving them the tools to be able to do their jobs much more effectively. Now, many people in the cannabis industry, when I speak to about this point, they say, well, hold on a minute. I don't want the cops to be able to see all of this information about me. What about my privacy and things like that? And I say, well, wait, you actually do want them to be able to verify the legality of your activity because guess what? If law enforcement check all of these things and then do the wrong thing, let's say arrest the person or make false claims, well, guess what the evidence that is going to be used against them is? It's held in Parsl. And it's immutable and they can't touch it or alter it. It's up on the chain.
I was smiling because you're definitely an engineer. You put some serious thought into this thing. Doctor, it's wow. I mean, you've got a lot of different angles covered. And I'm actually blown away about how intricately you've broken this down and really thought about it. And I see the need. I guess the last thing that I wanted to ask about was something that I saw in the presentation was you guys do kind of customer engagement, use subscriptions, loyalty cards, feedback, and most importantly, you guys have education. Like, how does this all work? Is it through an application? And what's kind of the breakdown of that?
So similarly, as we said, we're using smart packaging. It's one of the core pillars of the platform. As it's moving through the supply chain, that chip has a track and trace function. But let's remember, it's smart, it's context aware. So what will happen when someone scans it is contextualized based on who they are, what they're scanning with, what their authority level is, and when and where they're scanning. So when that bit of packaging arrives into a dispensary but hasn't been purchased yet, well, it should now serve a pre-purchase function so that if an end user come and they scan it, well, that's now an excellent time to deliver marketing content to that end user because that's what they want at that point. Yeah. Now, that marketing content might be the very specific lab test results. It might be the history of that product and where it came from and who made it. Or it might be highly engaging video content from the grower who, put his heart and soul into creating that cannabis. And the only way that they can deliver that message effectively is through a short video that can get shown to people who are seeing that cannabis before they purchase it. That same, and there we're using that principle of, people today are we get bombarded by advertising everywhere we go and anything we do. It's just nonstop and out of control. But, our philosophy is that, again, marketing has a place in all of this, and it's actually a good thing if it's done effectively. So we give people options, but then we also tailor what they see to make it the most likely thing for them to actually want to see. Now, I spoke about that at a pre-purchase level. You can then use that smart packaging to scan the product through the POS to be able to enable the purchase process. But then you're an end user. You've taken your cannabis, you've gone home, and you've started to consume it. Well, most likely you haven't consumed everything in the packaging, and so the packaging is still there. So the way that the system is set up is consumers will be educated to know that there's still an opportunity to continue to interact with that packaging and do things like leave feedback on the product or receive marketing specials that may be particularly relevant, because it's not even just cannabis businesses that should have the opportunity to market in there, but I mean, and it's a little bit funny, but, Joe's Pizza Shop around the corner is probably something that is highly relevant to a user that has just purchased cannabis. So they should have an opportunity to be able to market to those people. And that's just as relevant as, the dispensary being able to market their products, or a processor and edibles manufacturer marketing how they created special birthday cakes with cannabis infused. All of those things are relevant, and we do a lot of that one thing as well I want to mention. So the feed, sometimes instead of getting marketing, what will appear is a request for feedback. First of all, consumers should be empowered to know that their experiences are valuable and will add value to the entire ecosystem, so that they've got the opportunity to leave that feedback if they want. And at a retail consumer feedback level, that's kind of okay. But if we take it to the next level, well, many of these people are purchasing and using cannabis as a medicine for a particular reason. So let's start to build up data sets on how effective that medicine is, what the symptoms are, how quickly it's working for them, or what's not working for them, so that we can start to improve cannabis-related science by providing the researchers with significantly more data to be able to work with, to be able to prove it. Now, it's a little controversial, but, sometimes clinical trials these days are also looked at with a grain of salt and perhaps are not as trusted as they should be. So one of the things that we do is we're taking that feedback, and through some special algorithms, we standardize it and then we put it on chain. All of a sudden it becomes immutable. It becomes aggregated and anonymized so that there's no privacy risks. But then all of a sudden, there is real evidence for the general public to see, well, these people claim that cannabis was effective for epilepsy, but when you can see 5,000 legitimate use cases of people in the last day that had epilepsy and used it as a medicine and had an effective response,
yeah,
you simply can't deny it.
Brilliant. Absolutely.
And then within all of that, we then also layer in education about cannabis, cannabis science, but then also blockchain at the same time, because people deserve to be aware of the incredible technology that is enabling their experience within this ecosystem. And I think that the only way that we're going to be able to smash away the stigma both around cannabis and blockchain is through education, and then the evidence of what it can do for people.
I get it. I understand what you're trying to do, and I think it's great. I can't believe how well you thought this out. I can't believe how many different moving parts there are, and your insight is. I shouldn't be surprised, but I am. Being an engineer, it's kind of probably something that's natural for you, but you really thought this through, and excuse me. It's interesting to me. It looks like a really, really well-devised system, and I'm impressed. Moving on, is there a Parsl token? How exactly is that going to work? And I guess a little bit about kind of the roadmap. Where are you right now? What are the future plans? And how is everything going to roll out?
Yeah. So we actually have two different tokens that we use. One of the tokens that we use we call pods, and it's a stable coin, fixed value currency, one-to-one with the US dollar, and it's the one that I described right in the beginning, that only when real funds come into the ecosystem do we create that token, and when those funds are withdrawn from the ecosystem, we burn it. We maintain 100% liquidity because we need to totally minimize the risks of a business to operate using that digital currency.
Yeah.
When I talk to many other people about it, rather than calling it a cryptocurrency, I even talk to them and say, just think of pods as a casino chip that is digital and backed by the blockchain. So it's a much more secure casino chip. And that's all it's for. And why does that token exist? That token exists to provide the end-to-end financial tracking that I described earlier that enables the automated compliance reporting and, all of those sorts of things.
Of course.
So that's the first token we've got. The second token that we've got is actually called the seed token. And the reason that token exists is because we need to protect businesses from the true complexity of the costs that exists in and around this system. If I go to a cannabis grower up in Humboldt County who lives off the grid, doesn't want to own a phone and all of those sorts of things, and they have every right to do so, and I start talking about staking and, I'm going to lose them. They're not going to want to participate, and they're just going to do it the way they've been doing it for the last 50 years.
Sure.
So not cool. So what people sometimes say, well, if like someone's a grower, what do they actually have to do to participate in the system? We break it down. We make it really, really easy. And we say all they need to do is buy smart packaging. And by the way, even though we ensure the supply of the chips for security purposes, we work with any packaging manufacturer. It's not up to us to make that decision for a business. That's their decision. Yeah. But all they've got to do is buy smart packaging and pay a subscription fee in a way that they're kind of already used to doing for many other services that they provide. What we then do is we translate the costs of those subscription fees, pay the costs that we've got, acquire the EOS we need to be able to run the network, and that way we actually protect those users from having to face the true costs of the blockchain. So that's what the seed token is used for. And then the seed token also provides an additional benefit because by allowing us to create the Parsl Foundation that works for advocacy for the spread of medicinal cannabis legalization at a global level, and also provides for what we actually like to call Ithaca Dreams. So Ithaca is our acronym that we use for the platform. It stands for the Internet of All Things About Cannabis. And Ithaca Dreams is, you can kind of analogize it with like a cannabis-specific Make-A-Wish program. So our philosophy is that there's all of these people out there where their lives have changed because of the incredible healing powers of medicinal cannabis, and all of a sudden they're able to do things that they previously weren't able to do. So if I go back all the way to that original story that I saw in the meetup here in Australia, the kid was going to be a triathlete. Well, that's probably unlikely at this point, but Ithaca Dreams would provide funding to take that kid to the Olympics and give him a special experience that previously wouldn't be possible were it not for the incredible power of medicinal cannabis.
It's cool. That's really, really neat. I love it, man. I do. Intricate system. It's a big undertaking, but I think that I don't think I could have even thought of some of the complexities that you just described solutions to. So I think that's really, really cool. I guess I kind of really briefly asked about the roadmap. Where are you and where will you be in the next little while? Like how far along is the project?
Yep. So we're developing our beta product at the moment, and we have some beta partners that we're going to roll out with in Q4 of this year. So it's ready in about 6 to 8 weeks, give or take.
Yep.
We're going to run, and then we expect to have an initial product launch in Q1 2019.
Nice.
And one thing also that I do want to mention. Look, if we tried to do all of this at once, it's very likely that the whole system would fall over. So we're trying to be very sensible in the way that we're doing it. And we've got a fairly aggressive but lengthy 24-month roadmap where we progressively add more and more features, ensuring that the system is stable and operable the entire way along. So that's sort of where we're at with that.
Where can people find you? Like, where can people source some information? Where can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more? And, ultimately, if they want to communicate, they want to find out more, maybe they want to contribute to the project, maybe they have ideas for the project, maybe they want to invest in the project, whatever it might be. Where can people track you down?
So our Telegram channel is definitely the best place to do any of that. Sure. People can get information from our website as well. We're going to be progressively releasing more and more detail around different elements of the system that we've just been talking about.
I'm going to get you to send me your links, and I'm going to post absolutely everything below in the interview so that they can track you down and they can come and find everything, and they can have a conversation with you. I think it's funny because it's very controversial, even though it shouldn't be, because I think that the way that we look at cannabis should be changed, because it has been proven to be incredibly effective, and there's some really, really serious scientific data to back that up. So I guess as I said, I will list everything in regards to all your contact information below. Is there kind of any parting thoughts or anything else you wanted to say for the EOS community before I close this off?
Yes, I would. So I'd actually like to announce the Parsl airdrop and snapshot dates.
Awesome.
Which the snapshot will be occurring on the 24th of October, and the airdrop will be commencing on the 29th of October and finishing shortly after that. So for people that would like to get their hands on some seed token, now's the time to get some EOS.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I think that's kind of cool that you left that as kind of an exclusive announcement for this interview. So I appreciate it. We've spoken at length. I think you're a really, really good guy. I now understand that you're a really, really intelligent man as well. I think it's well thought out. I'm excited for Parsl. I'm excited for what you're doing, and I hope that you'll come back for more interviews to keep me updated as the project moves along. I encourage anybody to reach out to you, to get in touch, join you on your Telegram, check out the website, because it's a really captivating project, and it's bringing two things that have faced similar struggles in terms of acceptance together, which is, of course, cannabis and blockchain. So it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today, Doctor. Thank you so much for your time, and please stay in touch.
No, thank you very much too. It's also been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and thank you very much, and I'll definitely be coming back for another chat.
Pleasure. The honor is mine. We'll see you soon.